Hi, I'm Beck Gutierrez, and I'm joined today with Dr. Alfonso Alanis with ResearchPoint Global. He has over 30 years of experience in clinical research and over 5 years in private practice. His most recent interest has centered around exploring ways to increase the participation of racial and ethnic minorities in clinical trials, as these groups have been consistently underrepresented in these studies. So first of all, Dr. Alanis, thank you very much for joining me today and shedding your insight on this critical topic that's affecting clinical trials.
Thank you, Beck.
So I'd like to first start by asking, what is the current state of minority representation in clinical trials, especially as it relates to diseases which disproportionately affect minorities?
All right. The state of minority participation in clinical trials is not good and has not been good for a long time, Beck. And this is a significant problem. And it is a significant problem for a number of reasons. Number one is that minorities are growing very fast in this country. By 2040, according to the Bureau of Census of the country, by 2040, minorities will become the majority in the United States. There are already about 10 large cities in this country where minorities are already the majority. And they continue to grow very, very rapidly. Number two is there are a number of diseases that are really have taken epidemic proportions, such as type 2 diabetes, HIV, AIDS, cardiovascular disease, certain types of cancers, all of which disproportionately affect with a much higher incidence racial and ethnic minorities. So as you can imagine, if you are not including racial and ethnic minorities in the clinical trials of the new treatments for these diseases, you're not going to gain a lot of information on how these new treatments perform in these populations of patients. So we're not talking here about an issue of social justice, although there are significant elements of social justice that, this is not the topic of our conversation today. But we're talking about good medicine and good science. If we want to practice good medicine and good science, we should be developing new treatments for these diseases in the populations that suffer those diseases. What is the risk of not doing that? The risk of not doing that is that you have the potential to actually find out later on that you have either safety or efficacy issues in those populations, differences in the safety or differences in the efficacy of these treatments. There are already examples of this. This has happened already with a number of drugs, and the list keeps on growing. I'm not going to talk about each one of them, but there are a number of drugs that have been found to behave differently. So this is a real issue, and it's a major issue today, and will continue to grow as time goes by.
Now, you mentioned that this had been a problem, or it has been a problem for quite some time and growing for quite some time. So what, what has led you to the position that you're at now, where you realize that there are not only things you've learned in your experience, but also new things that you might want to implement to address this problem?
Well, my interest in this topic really has to do with, as I mentioned before, with doing good science and good medicine. I became keenly aware of this problem in the study of diabetes. I actually did a very in-depth review of 10 very large clinical trials that were done in this country in patients with type 2 diabetes. All of these 10 trials actually were trials designed to develop new treatments for type 2 diabetes. The total number of patients included in these 10 trials was about 250,000, 235,000 patients. So this was a significant body of individuals participating in these clinical trials. And what we saw in these 10 trials is that 78.8% of the patients in these studies were non-Hispanic whites. So the majority of patients being studied, 3/4 or a little over 3/4 of patients studied in these trials were actually non-minority patients. Now, if you look at the epidemiology of the disease, it's exactly the opposite. Only 26% of the new cases of type 2 diabetes in this country, and we have about 1.2 million new cases every year, only 26% of those cases occur in non-Hispanic whites. All the other 76% are actually minorities. 37% are African American, 36% are Hispanics, and then there are smaller proportions of patients in the Asian and Native American categories that actually suffer the disease. So as you can see, there's a totally, opposite, almost an antagonistic sort of proportion of patients from those suffering to those participating in clinical trials. So as I reviewed the history and I began trying to understand why this was happening, I learned that for a number of years there have been attempts, multiple attempts actually, by the federal government and by other organizations to try to address this issue. Even the Institute of Medicine, even the Department of Health and Human Services, they have had initiatives to try to address this, but with not a lot of success. So I actually became very interested in trying to see if there's something can be done to address this problem. So that's what I'm trying to do still today.
Despite all that intervention from all those government bodies, this continues to exist as a problem. So what do you think are the reasons that continue to make this a challenging issue as it relates to clinical trials?
Well, that's a very good question, Beck. And it's hard not to be sarcastic about answering this question in an objective manner. But let me just say that a lot of it has to do with history. There are essentially three reasons why minorities have not been participating in clinical trials. Those three reasons are, number one, is there are some historic elements to it. Everybody, or most people, have heard about the Tuskegee syphilis experiments in African Americans in the 1930s. These were very unethical experiments done without obtaining informed consent and withholding treatment of these patients for about 50 or so years. Unbelievable stuff. That would never happen again in this country, and hopefully in any other country. And there are some other as bad experiences in different groups of minority patients. So minorities are a little resistant. They are, they're not very trustful of the healthcare community, and let alone the research community. And therefore, traditionally, they have been, I'm not going to say reluctant, but they have been, very inquisitive whenever they are invited to participate in clinical trials. They want to make sure that it's legit and that it's done by the book and that they're going to be protected and so forth and so on. Second reason is one of the underappreciated elements of this whole thing is that minority patients actually tend to see physicians who actually are themselves minority members. Minority physicians understand their patients' culture. They understand their patients' sometimes language. For example, if the patients come from different countries in Asia, it's difficult to find translators, but if the physician speaks the language, it's very easy to communicate. So there's patients and physicians in these situations create a very deep and special bond that makes a huge difference. And one of the issues is, which is the third reason, is we don't have enough minority physicians graduating from medical schools in this country today. And the ones that are out there have not been invited to participate in clinical research. So those are really, in essence, and I'm just summarizing a whole body of information in a capsule here. Those are the three key elements. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people in different academic institutions, in the government and in private companies have used a lot of arguments. For example, the fear argument has been utilized ad nauseum, I would say, to justify. It's very easy when someone, let's say that you go to the Food and Drug Administration with your clinical trial and you have 90% of your patients are white, and they ask you, so why you didn't include minorities? You say, well, because they didn't want to participate because they were fearful. So that's been utilized traditionally as an excuse to not invite minorities. But the reality is, when you invite minorities to participate in clinical trials, if that is done properly through their physicians, minorities will actually participate just as much as any other group. And not only participation, but the retention of those patients in the clinical trial and their compliance with the design of the clinical trial, with the treatments in the clinical trial, is as good or better than for any other group.
So then in order to sort of alleviate this need and sort of address all those issues that you just mentioned, the apprehension of the patients and the physicians as well, what does RPG like to do to sort of soothe those concerns and help their clients succeed in accelerating enrollment for minorities in their clinical trials?
Well, I think you essentially are leading almost with the answer here. What I implied in my previous answer is that if you actually are able to identify minority physicians who are interested to participate in clinical trials and who actually take care of minority patients, they will actually bring those minority patients to the clinical trials. And that's exactly what we have done. And we have done this repeatedly. And what we have observed to our, I would say, more than satisfaction, frankly, is that we have been able to enroll patients just as fast or even better or faster, and with the same quality or better than any other clinical trials. So what we have done at ResearchPoint Global, and we continue to experiment on doing, is trying to really accrue a body of physicians who are themselves minority members and see a lot of minority patients, or who, not being minority members, still practice in areas where there are a lot of minorities. And we target those physicians. If they're not properly trained, we train them, and then we ask them to participate in our clinical trials. We have a lot of experience with some therapeutic areas, not all therapeutic areas, but for example, one of the leading ones is type 2 diabetes. What we have seen, just to give you an idea, the average investigator site in the United States today in type 2 diabetes trials enrolls 0.2 to 0.3 patients per site per month, okay? And that's across industry. You go to the big companies, the one that I used to work at, Lilly, and Novo and Glaxo and Merck, and they all will tell you the same. It's 0.2 to 0.3 patients per site per month. In our experience, our average enrollment rate with these physicians taking care of type 2 diabetes patients is 0.7 patients per site per month. So it's almost 3 times the speed of enrollment of any other site that is participating in other clinical trials. So this is a real significant, and frankly, I'll just be honest, when I began this journey, I suspected that we could actually address this issue by, contacting the minority physician, and I almost predicted that we were going to be able to perform just par with everyone else. I never imagined that actually the performance was going to be actually superior, better than the average site in the U.S. So this is very exciting because this tells you that really if you have the appropriate tools and if you actually invite those patients to participate, they will come and they will participate in the clinical trial. So we may just have a way to start addressing this issue. And this is exciting. This is an exciting time right now because a lot of other people are beginning to actually get very interested in this area. People are talking more and more about what they call targeted therapies. I'm sure you've heard that term, or personalized treatments. What that means is, we're trying to develop treatments that maximize the efficacy and minimize the toxicity for each individual. Well, what better way to start doing that by going to the people who actually suffer these diseases and study them in real life conditions and expose them to these treatments and make sure that they actually gain all the benefit and not the toxicity of these studies. So this is pretty exciting. This is a first step to getting towards targeted or personalized therapies. Eventually, all this is going to probably be more related to pharmacogenomics and genetics and DNA studies. But we're not there yet, even though we have already mapped the human genome and all the applicability of all of this to real life clinical medicine, is going to lag behind quite a few years. But if you actually use race and ethnicity as a surrogate, that's very appropriate, and this is exciting. Food and Drug Administration is really getting very interested. They are requesting more and more to sponsors of clinical trials that they actually bring clinical trials that are representative of the populations in terms of ethnicity and race. So this is a good time to be in this area. I really truly believe that this time things are going to change.
So how does ResearchPoint Global support its clients in successfully overcoming minority underrepresentation?
Well, as I implied back in my previous response, the key is really to incorporate the participation of not only patients, but frankly, minority physicians or physicians who have access to minority patients into the clinical trials. So what we have done is cultivate the relationships with these physicians. We have a database with a large number of information about a large number of physicians who actually can actually deliver these patients in clinical trials and who are good performers in these studies. So we actually are making a transition towards trying to include more and more minority patients in all of our clinical trials. But if someone has a particular need, we're very capable of actually including even more patients in those studies going to our databases.
Great. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much. And we look forward to what's to come.
Thank you, Beck.